You open a streaming app after a long day, and you just want to watch something. Something easy. Something that doesn't require much from you. But 20 minutes later, you're still scrolling. You haven't watched anything. You feel vaguely annoyed, maybe even more tired than when you started. And the strange part is, you made 0 decisions that actually mattered today. You just looked at a list. This is not a small thing. It happens with lunch menus, with email folders, with the fonts on a document you don't even care about. At some point in a regular day, a perfectly capable adult can feel genuinely worn down by choosing between options that, objectively, don't matter that much. And the easiest explanation most people reach for is that they're tired, distracted, or just not motivated enough. But that explanation doesn't quite hold up under pressure, because this happens to people who slept well. It happens on weekends. It happens when the stakes are low and the mood is fine. The experience is consistent enough and common enough that it starts to suggest something else is going on. Not a personal failing, not a discipline problem, something more structural, something built into how human cognition actually works. The common assumption about choice is that more of it is always better. Western culture in particular has treated the abundance of options as a form of freedom, even as a moral good. If you have 30 kinds of yogurt to choose from, that must be an improvement over having 5. If a platform offers 10,000 shows, that must be more valuable than one with 100. The logic seems obvious. But research into how people actually experience choice paints a much more complicated picture. When people are presented with a large number of options, something happens cognitively that doesn't happen with fewer options. The brain doesn't just compare items on a list. It runs a kind of background process that involves anticipating regret, estimating value, and trying to protect against making the wrong choice. This process runs whether or not you're aware of it, and it costs something, not metaphorically, cognitively. Studies consistently show that people who choose from large option sets report lower satisfaction with their final choice, even when the choice itself is identical to what someone chose from a smaller set. This is sometimes described in terms of the paradox of choice, a concept that has been examined across dozens of research contexts. The basic finding is that increasing options beyond a certain threshold doesn't increase satisfaction. It increases the mental work required to decide, and it increases the psychological weight attached to whatever decision is made, because the more options there are, the more visible the trade-offs become, and the easier it is to imagine having chosen better. Real life doesn't make this abstract. Think about the experience of choosing a new laptop bag on a site that sells 400 variants. You filter by price, by size, by color. You read reviews that contradict each other. You open 6 tabs. You close them. You reopen 2. At no point does this feel like freedom. It feels like a job. And when you finally choose or give up entirely, there's often a residual feeling of unease, not because the bag matters, but because the process extracted something from you. Or consider a more mundane version. You're at your desk around noon. Someone sends a message asking where you want to order lunch from. The group is open to anything. That openness, which seems generous, is actually more demanding than being handed a menu from one specific place. Now you're responsible for gathering preferences, imagining options, and advocating for something on behalf of people with different tastes. A small task has become a coordination problem, and you haven't done any actual work yet. The same pattern appears in digital environments. Notification settings, privacy controls, subscription options, account preferences. Each of these involves a decision that needs to be made, evaluated, and sometimes revisited. Individually, they seem trivial. Cumulatively, they constitute a kind of ambient cognitive load that research suggests accumulates across a day in ways people don't consciously track, but definitely feel. There's also something worth understanding about how the brain weights choices differently based on reversibility. When a choice feels permanent, or even just difficult to undo, the evaluation process intensifies. This is why choosing a phone plan feels heavier than choosing a sandwich, even though both might take about the same amount of active time. The brain assigns effort proportional to perceived consequence, and sometimes, especially under accumulated cognitive load, it miscalibrates. Things that shouldn't feel heavy start to feel heavy. This is the part of the experience that most people find slightly uncomfortable to sit with. The realization isn't that choices are bad, or that having options is harmful. It's that the human brain was not designed for the volume and density of choices that a modern environment presents in a single average day. The discomfort people feel when they can't pick a restaurant or abandon a digital cart half-finished isn't weakness. It's a system responding to conditions it wasn't built to handle at scale. Research in cognitive psychology refers to something called decision fatigue, the observed pattern where the quality and ease of decision-making degrades the more decisions a person has already made. This has been studied in contexts from courtrooms to hospitals to ordinary consumer behavior. The mechanism isn't fully settled in the research, but the pattern itself has been replicated enough to be considered reliable. Earlier decisions in a day tend to be more deliberate. Later ones tend to be either impulsive or avoided entirely. What this doesn't mean is worth saying clearly. It doesn't mean every difficult choice is the result of decision fatigue. Sometimes choices are genuinely hard, because the stakes are real and the information is incomplete. It doesn't mean that people who feel overwhelmed by everyday choices have something wrong with them cognitively. The experience is not a diagnostic indicator, and it certainly doesn't mean that the solution is simple or that changing a few habits will resolve the underlying structural reality of living in an environment that produces a high volume of choice. This is also not a problem that affects everyone equally or in the same way. People vary in how much ambiguity they're comfortable with, how much they're driven to find the optimal option versus an acceptable one, and how sensitive they are to the possibility of regret. Research on what's sometimes called maximizing versus satisficing suggests that people who feel compelled to find the absolute best option in any given situation tend to experience choice overload more acutely than people who are more comfortable stopping at good enough. Neither tendency is a character flaw. They're just different orientations, with different costs attached. What stays true across those differences is that the design of modern environments, physical and digital, consistently presents more choices than most cognitive systems are optimized to handle comfortably. That's not a personal observation or a cultural complaint. It's a fairly well-supported description of a mismatch between cognitive architecture and environmental design. And so when an evening passes and you realize you spent more mental energy deciding what to watch than you did on anything else, that experience is worth examining quietly, without judgment, not as evidence of laziness or poor willpower or a need to optimize your habits, but as a reasonable response to a genuine friction point between how your brain works and how a significant portion of your daily environment is structured. The choice was always going to cost something. The question was just whether you knew that going in.